Today's forum is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod Times. And special thanks to the Cape Cod Community Center taping today and rebroadcasting before the election date of November 8th. This debate will also be available on demand. We especially also thank the Cape Cod Community College for the use of this beautiful space and for hosting us today. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan but political organization whose primary purpose is citizen participation through education and advocacy. The League of Women Voters does take action on specific issues after studying consensus. However, the League's nonpartisan in elections of candidates, and we do not support or oppose any candidates. My name is Nancy Carapezza, and I'm delighted to be on the Cape again to moderate. Again, a special welcome to everyone here in the audience and the viewers, and especially to the 4 candidates for the 9th Congressional District, representing the Cape and Islands, South Coast, and parts of the South Shore. We have in alphabetical order, Republican candidate Mark Allegro, Independent Chris Cataldo, Independent Paul Harrington, and Democrat William Keating. The candidates have agreed to the following procedures and ground rules for today's debate. There will be 4 segments. In the first segment, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for their opening statement. The order of these candidate statements has been determined by a random drawing. And throughout the forum, I will attempt to continuously rotate the order of the candidates' responses. The second and third segments are questions and answers. First from Jim Spillane from the Cape Cod Times, and then written questions from the audience. Each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. And as I mentioned, I'll continually try to rotate the order of responders. In the last segment, candidates will have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The candidates will speak in the order chosen by random drawing, we just did before starting today's event. Our timers are right here in the front row. They will be holding up a yellow sign for 30 seconds and then a red sign that says stop for closing. They're Nancy Erskine and Betsy Bray. So I ask the members of the audience if you could please submit your questions in writing. There are League members walking throughout the audience. Just hold up your card and we will try to get as many questions answered as possible. We will begin with an opening statement from Representative Keating.
Thank you, Nancy, and sponsors, thank you for doing this in a particularly unfortunate time in national debates. It's refreshing to be here with my fellow candidates and be part of this. I want to tell you that during this period of time, I've reflected on an amazing experience I had since I've been in Congress, sort of to root me through this time. I was in Helmand Province in Afghanistan while the war was going on, and there was firefights going on all the time. As I did when I visited troops so many times, I asked, is there anything I can ever do? I'll do anything to try and help. And only once did they ever say, yes, there is. There's a man we want you to meet. There's a man who is giving us information about IEDs, where they're located with the Taliban, and put them what the Taliban is up to. He's saving our lives, and he's risking his. So I met with him, and I thanked him. But I had to ask him this question. Okay? You're risking your life doing this. In fact, that was very much he survived. Why? Why are you doing this? And he reached behind him and brought forth his 8-year-old son. And he said, this is why. I want him to have an education. I want him to have an opportunity. He's not going to have that here. And you know, we all take for granted so many of the freedoms we have here. But we just don't have to remember this. I think in my job, I've tried before, but certainly this reinforces it. Each and every day, I just don't want to provide the opportunity for the people. I want to do more. I want to improve what we have. And if we have a lesson given to us from someone who's not even a citizen here, who's risking his life for the things we believe in, that's what America's about. That's what elections are about. And from my vantage point, that's what my job is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Cape Cod Times for hosting this event. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about my candidacy. My wife Christine and I live in Chatham. Before we moved to Chatham, we lived in another part of the district in Duxbury for 26 years, where we raised our 3 children. I'm originally from Dorchester, St. Brendan's Parish, for those of you who track those things. I went to graduate from BC High, Boston College, and Suffolk Law School. After law school, I started my own law practice. I represented indigent defendants in Dorchester District Court and helped people buy and sell homes and other general practice. I grew the firm from a one-man operation to 30 employees in 5 offices. In 1992, I left the full-time practice of law to help a client company go public. After the IPO, I stayed with the DeWolf companies for 11 years. I became the president of the company, and we grew the company from a $15 million company to a $150 million company. More recently, I spent several years researching and analyzing and writing a book on public policy called The Common Sense Rules. The book analyzes the constitutional underpinnings of American government, talks about the purpose of government, and I really explored and examined the problems we have today and offered some bold and innovative solutions in the book. One of the main findings in the book is that we face an unprecedented set of circumstances, a perfect storm, if you will, that's going to result in an economic and fiscal disaster in the coming years if we don't make major change. Another conclusion was that these major changes will not come under the present politically dysfunctional system. The two-party system is broken and we need to fix it. I'm running as an independent. Because of that, I will bring independent-minded ideas to Washington and try to work with both parties to reach solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Cataldo.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for having us today. My name is Chris Cataldo, and I am the third option on the November 8th general election ballot for the United States House of Representatives. And I implore you to check out my website, cataldoforcongress.com, because I am not bought and paid for. We all have a lot more in common than different. That became abundantly clear as I got access to this ballot myself, as we got every single signature without paying a dime. And we achieved that ballot access for under $5 grand at a time in this country when it costs about $1.6 million. I'm here because whether it's Democrats or Republicans, there are studies that show that once elected to the United States Congress, these people spend 6 to 8 hours a day dialing for dollars. And ladies and gentlemen, the phone goes down only to be voting party toe in line. We need, ladies and gentlemen, solutions to the problems we face as a nation. You know, we talk about Afghanistan, but we need to stop toppling dictators in Iraq. We need to stop it in Libya, Syria. I mean, I care about the lives of all of us. We're in this together. I'm a member of the middle class. My family started a small business. I come from veterans. You know, I am really somebody that before on this stage punched a time clock 40 hours a week, and I'm not somebody that's raising hundreds of thousands of dollars because we don't need that money to have common sense. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to prove that you don't need $5 million on average to win a congressional seat and to have common sense and respect to policy. You know, we're all looking at our health insurance going up on average 22%. You know, and we're looking at 22 veterans a day committing suicide. We've got $21 trillion in debt. Right, $4.7 trillion every fiscal year coming in terms of our tax money, and it's never been wasted faster in more ways than ever before. I am here to unite the country, to unite the people of our district, and to show, ladies and gentlemen, that money is not justice in this country. And I hope that you consider me, I hope you check out the FEC and the House Ethics to prove that every single thing you see and everything you hear from me is in fact the truth. You know, and instead of dialing for dollars, I will be standing up and representing you. Thank you.
Opening statement from Dr. Allegra.
Good morning, and thank you to the organizers for this. Please set aside party politics for just a little while and answer these questions silently and to yourselves. Does anyone in this room really believe it's okay to spend $1 trillion a year more than we have to spend? Is there anyone in this room that honestly believes that the economy is just hunky-dory these days? In the midst of this opiate crisis, if I told you that more than half the heroin that comes into this country comes across the southern border, is there anyone in this room who would suggest that we should not seal up that border? Or that we should unshackle Iran's nuclear capabilities and place billions of dollars in their hands? I'm guessing these are things on which we can all agree. then why can't we fix these problems? Could it be because we have politicians so entrenched in Washington, so intensely bent on their own agenda, that they've lost their ties with the rest of us? Our congressmen and women are supposed to represent our interests. So why do we have people dying in our alleyways of heroin overdoses? Why do we have $20 trillion national debt? And why are young people saddled with tuition debt and forced to live in their parents' basements? The answer is because they're not representing us, neither here in Massachusetts nor across the country. In today's forum, you'll hear two different views, two different visions for this country. One that puts faith in bloated, intrusive, and corrupt federal government, and another that relies on common sense, industry, and the entrepreneurial spirit that made America great in the first place. It really all boils down to freedom. Yours. Let's begin to take it back today. Thank you.
From the Cape Cod Times will ask the first two questions, and we will begin with a response first from Mr. Harrington.
Good morning. First question, and this question will be for all four candidates here on the stage. The Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant in Plymouth is scheduled to close in mid-2019. A lot could go wrong, and already has between now and then. In fact, a Nuclear Regulatory Commission team is coming to Plymouth next month for a major inspection. As a member of Congress, what would you do in the next 3 years to ensure the NRC does its job as a watchdog to keep us safe here in the district?
Great question. Thank you. First of all, I looked at the Pilgrim nuclear power plant from my window when I lived in Duxbury. I was about 5 miles away from it. So I understand the issue. I understand the concerns. I do believe that we need to do a better job of enforcing the regulations, especially in this situation where we're having a phase out of an old nuclear power plant. Certainly, as your congressman, I would be very involved in what goes on with that situation, and would clearly be focused on forcing the Nuclear Regulatory Authority to do their job. That being said, I think there is a safe way to phase out the power plant. I wish that we had a better way of dispose of the radioactive waste, that problem was settled years ago with the facility in Nevada, which has been held up by politics in Washington. So the two-party system, they even work to circumvent reasonable solutions to large problems. Beyond that, I think we need to work in terms of energy to more alternative sources of energy, and we need to do that more quickly. Thank you.
Well, it comes down to jobs, and it comes down to money and safety and the environment. And the truth of the matter is that this is a much greater issue than just the nuclear power plant in Plymouth. This is how the state is going to go forward. You know, we look north to our borders in Vermont and Maine, and we're seeing that they're able to completely operate without fossil fuels or nuclear at all. You know, the plant can be dismantled safely and properly. In fact, $1 billion has been put aside to do just that. It's this transitioning of the labor force and all the vendors involved and all the money that's involved. You know, we need to look at this, and this is our leadership on the Democratic-Republican side. You know, we need to realize we have a lot more in common than different, that we need to protect our environment, that, you know, the fact that 40% of the energy that powers the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is fossil fuel oil-based through the natural gas. I mean, this power plant, I'm confident it can be safely dismantled. The money's there. It's just a matter of transitioning the labor force to alternative sources of energy. And we're seeing wind, we're seeing solar, we're seeing hydro, you know, we're seeing money going towards this sort of thing. You know, I actually agree with the governor in respect to his initiative, in respect to storing energy. All of these things are steps in the right direction. But I think what we need to do is sit down with the parties involved, and we need to figure out, negotiate this, and, you know, it can be done. And I'm very optimistic of that.
Sure. Well, many of you in the audience know that I have a background in science, and this would be one of those times when it might be useful to have a scientist in Washington, D.C. on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which oversees the Department of Energy, by the way. Look, you know, dismantling Pilgrim has has to be a careful and measured process. People sometimes get alarmed when there are not scheduled, but programmed shutdowns. When problems arise in the plant, it goes into a mode and actions are put into place to shut it down or shut down sectors of it that need to be controlled. And that's what we've had so far. Nuclear energy is the closest thing to renewable and very clean energy that we have in this country. And unfortunately, we've done ourselves a disservice, one that France, for instance, was wise enough to not do unto themselves, in retarding the development of our own nuclear power supply in this country. There haven't been plants going up for years or licensed for years. Nuclear power is something we should look to for the future, and we need to develop, allow the NRC to do their job, which they do, and on occasions when there's malfeasance in any government agency, including the DOE, they need to be held accountable. So I think I've answered the question as well as any right now.
Thank you. I'm going to start again. Wait for a second on that. I've done the same thing with my cell phone, so thank you. I've been working on this issue very hard because it's an important issue for our area. Not only...
Pull the microphone closer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've been working on this issue for some time. During the last couple of weeks, we sent a letter, which I led the House side on, to the NRC, making sure that those hard vents are in place, making sure that they're there for safety purposes. That's one of many efforts to try and deal with the situation. It's difficult because of its preemption protections it has, unusually as a utility. Look, it's closing down in the next few years. In that process, I'm very concerned, given their track record, one of the poorest in the country in terms of safety, that they do it the way they should. I'm afraid they're going to take the same attitude and energy that they have before and just ignore the responsibility, ignore the NRC, and we'll continue to deal with that. To try and magnify and multiply the influence I have, I started a coalition of legislators from the East Coast, the West Coast, all in similar situations working together. I brought the Plymouth officials in to my office so that they're part of this as well. And I'm also concerned with the shutdown, what we do with the workers and their families that are there. And I'm already working with the new energy we're going to have in my district, the offshore wind, to try and transition those workers into those skilled jobs and help those families as well.
Hey, thank you. Second question, and we'll begin with Mr. Cataldo with this. Cape Cod shorelines are eroding at an alarming pace. Sea levels are rising. Weather conditions are becoming more extreme. As a member of Congress, what actions or legislation would you pursue to help alleviate the effects of climate change?
I look at it very similar to how I look at trade. We look at what happened in the Paris summit. It seems as though we've hit this record legislative turning point where, they're saying that they're going to lower carbon emissions by 2% below the industrial levels, and it's not going to happen. And it's the very same way that the global trade didn't work out with NAFTA, with the 5.6 million jobs and 66,000 manufacturing plants that were lost. Assuming for us to think that a global organization can enforce laws of the land in respective countries throughout the world, it's a joke. And what's happening, the reason why we're not able to compete, for instance, with trade and manufacturing is because, these other nations are able to violate these agreements that they're in. And that's a scary notion. And when it comes to climate change, which is what's causing, this erosion, the water is rising. We need to address this as a country, but also as a world. And, I think it's going to come down to, as a member of Congress, sitting down, talking to the players, and making sure that they're able to, within their sovereign governments, within their own countries, pass laws that will allow all of us to work together, not just pretend that we are, like what just happened in Paris.
Well, the first thing that I'll do to address this issue is to not let people frame the issue with false assertions based on no data. I'm here to tell you as a scientist, and I admit that I'm not a climatologist, but I am a scientist with decades of experience, and you don't need to be a climatologist to know bad science when you see it. Climate change is a reality. The climate has been changing since the Earth first congealed and solidified, and it will continue to do so. We've experienced much wilder and broader temperature changes on this planet throughout its geological history that dwarf the changes that we're seeing right now. I'm here to tell you that Mars is warming, Jupiter is warming, and Pluto is warming, although we don't call Pluto a planet these days. And there are no cars, no SUVs on Jupiter, no factories on Pluto, and there's no cow flatulence on Mars. So the problem is not being caused by mankind, and we need to take an honest, hard look at it. Look, science, I'm here to tell you, is not determined by consensus. If it was, we would still believe that the Earth was flat and that continents don't move. And I can give you plenty more examples. Science is determined by truth. I love science too well to say anything other than that. Science is determined by truth, not political agendas.
I would ask that the audience refrain from clapping so that we can have as much time as possible to answer all the questions that have come forward.
Thank you. I couldn't disagree more. I mean, I don't think it's debatable that human actions affect climate change. In fact, 99.9% of scientists that are climatologists believe that. And the people that don't aren't cohesive in what they disagree with. So there's no question that it affects them, and we have to start there if we're going to combat this. And now the U.S. Geological Society has done a survey of Cape Cod, working with the Cape Cod Commission, working with mass environmental groups as well. And we're vulnerable here in this very fragile area. The sea is rising, and the studies they have show the effects of it. They range from a 4-foot rise having a $4.9 billion effect on property here to a 10-foot rise having the effect of cutting off Route 6 to Provincetown and isolating. So these are real changes. So what do we do about it? I've been working as a leader in this area on coastal resiliency. I've been working, leading the House side on Southern New England approach to this. We're getting grants. We're working the Coonamessett River Project, for example, trying to deal with trying to ease things. I've been a leader on estuary funding to preserve estuaries so we're healing normally. And we have to do things here. It's not just the environment, it's the economy that's affected by that, whether it's fishing, whether it's a hospitality industry, whether it's a lobster industry. These things are all real.
This is another issue on which you can look at the Democrats and the Republicans and say, this is why we're not going to solve this problem or any other problem. They are so far apart. In my view, the extremes on this issue are showing an ignorance. The science is not settled. It is not clear exactly what the answers to these questions are. There are multiple questions. The first question is there a long-term warming trend? The second question is it cyclical, or is it primarily caused by man-made activities? The third question is, do we know the correlation between the burning of fossil fuels and the overall change in the temperature? Do we know the correlation between the change in the temperature and the damage that it will do? We don't have clear answers to this. We should be studying it more. If the Democrats and Republicans in Washington could get together for even 5 minutes, they could put together a study committee, not relying on the UN, but an American study that would actually provide some answers to these questions. We need alternative sources of energy. There's no question that clean energy is better for all of us. But we have to balance the environment with the economy, as in many other areas, because if we just take one side of the story, then we're going to hurt one or the other. And who suffers when there's too much regulation and it increases the cost of energy and food and all the other staples? It's the poorest, least advantaged people in the country. So we need balance. We need to look at this issue in a more careful way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This next question for each of the candidates, and we'll begin with Dr. Allegro. What is your position on immigration?
Well, that's a loaded question because there's really two different questions that we're dealing with. There's the question of immigration, which is not a question at all. I know of no one, including myself, who has any objection to people immigrating to this country legally. Most of the people in this room either immigrated here legally or their parents or grandparents did. It's what makes this country great. It's helped to build the country. The question, the true question, is should we be permissive of illegal immigration? My position is no, that's not fair to the people who are waiting in line legally, and it's not fair to American citizens. Listen, I could go on for a long time about this. I've been to the border myself. It's a mess down there. If you had to live as those people do, who live on the borders, making sure that when they come in home from work at night on the night shift, as a nurse I spoke to did, that she backs into the garage because she's afraid somebody will follow her in. I could go on and on. The dead illegal immigrants in the desert, hundreds of them every year. It's a humanitarian issue, and I'm in favor of immigration, obviously not illegal immigration. But I would like to go back and address the question on global climate change. Yes, we do have clear information. The Earth is warming. It's been warming for over 10,000 years since we emerged from the last ice age. And yes, it's wonderful to lead initiatives, but not when they're to no end. And finally, if this is such settled science, I hereby challenge Mr. Keating or anyone at this table or any of their surrogates to meet me in an hour-long debate on the subject. I make myself available at any time. Thank you.
Just respect the time that the candidates are giving this morning, please. Representative Keating, your stand on immigration.
Well, the House has been divided. The House has enacted a bipartisan bill passed the U.S. Senate over 2 years ago. And people like President Bush on the Republican side, this is actually one area where a lot of Democrats and Republicans do get together and agree that things have to be done. The trouble in the House is doing it. This is an important issue to have settled. The worst alternative we have on the immigration issue is the present state of things. It's a broken system, and it's not getting better unless Congress acts. I do favor the comprehensive immigration plan that came forward from the Senate. It dealt with the issues in front of us. It dealt with economic issues that are affected by this. And it strengthened the borders as well. I'm on Homeland Security. We have really taken our assets from another country, from our wars. We're using them there. We have a strong border that way. We can do more with that system. But also, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a group that usually doesn't agree with the Democratic Party too much, is telling how important this is for our economy. They're forecasting independently, along with the Congressional Budget Office, that $1 trillion will be lost unless we resolve this issue in the next 10 years. So it's not just a question of people and trying to organize a system in and out of this country. It's an enormous economic issue. And to continue to stall and act on this is costing us dearly.
Mr. Harrington.
I agree. We need a resolution to this, and there was a reasonable compromise, but even when the so-called bipartisan compromises take place in Congress, nothing gets done. It still doesn't pass. We need to overhaul our immigration laws, and even legal immigration is broken in terms of who gets in line and when they get in line, how they get into this country. Certainly, we need to identify and do something about the 11 million or so people who are here in the country, technically illegally. I support a path to citizenship for them. I support a national ID program where immigrants who are here illegally would register, and if they haven't committed a crime, they would be on a path to citizenship, but they would get no benefits until 5, 7, 10 years go by, and if they still have lived in the country and contributed, then they would be able to apply for citizenship. So yes, that's a form of amnesty, it's conditional amnesty, but I think that to try to deport them all is not the solution. We also need to enforce the rules against employers. If someone is not registered under my program, then the employers would have a stiff penalty for employing someone without the appropriate authorization to be in the country.
Mr. Cataldo.
My great-grandfather came to this country with no more than $1 in his pocket. And he worked under the Schrapp smokestack in Boston, and then he saved up enough money to buy a push cart. And he stood in Scully Square with this push cart. And at some point he ended up being able to rent out a unit so that he could start making his own chocolate. And he ended up buying the entire block. And that factory was in operation for almost 100 years. And he paid his taxes because he drove on our roads. He used our fire departments, our police departments. Immigration needs to be done and done right. You know, we all have to pay our share. Freedom isn't free, but freedom should be available as an opportunity to all. But we have to understand that we haven't had comprehensive immigration reform since 1986, which is why voting in a Democrat or a Republican is just not going to work. I mean, we've been doing this for years, and it is just simply not working. What we need is a government that operates, because we're able to have that substantive conversation, not just be representing party interests and trying to make sure that nobody looks guilty on, you know, again, being asleep at the wheel. You know, what we need to look at is what's causing the immigration problems right now. I mean, look at Syria, for instance. We've got 5 million people within Syria displaced and 8 million that have fled. And, you know, this is because we can't seem to get it straight in terms of who we're fighting over there. This, you know, this is you know, I can see the stage being set for a major war. And I'll tell you something right now, I don't want to see any of us get drafted. I don't want to see one person die for something that doesn't make sense. You know, and when it comes to immigration, you know, we can't allow people to come in unless we know that they are, in fact, not a danger to this country. We have to protect the country. Thank you.
The next question will begin with Representative Keating for a response. What are the 3 most important issues facing this country, and how would you address them? What relevant experience do you have to address the issues you identified?
Well, I think a lot of the issues that revolve around our economy, if I can really gear in on this. General Martin Dempsey, who is the former Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was being quizzed by the Senate before his nomination, and he said, what is the #1 security issue in our country? And he said the economy, and he's right. We need a strong economy to have a strong security system. So I think that our economic issues, our security issues, and our opportunity issues for Americans in the middle class, all those 3 issues are critical, and they all surround and get back to our economy. I've been working hard for years at the state level. I've been working as a member of Congress. I've had a private business. I've been on the Small Business Committee and helped Massachusetts with small business innovation, research, monies that were being threatened to be taken away from our country. Small business drives our country and the economy. But education is critical as well. I talk to people from other countries who want to invest in the United States. And the #1 reason they're not is, they tell me, not the tax situation, but that we don't have a skilled, educated workforce. This is America. So education is critical for our economy as well. So if you're going to take one pathway to where our major issues are, look to the economy and look to what we have to do to make that economy strong. It'll keep us strong and secure worldwide and keep us stronger at home.
Mr. Harrington.
Well, I would agree that the economy is the #1 issue. It drives everything else, including our ability to have an effective foreign policy, which is also important. But our economy is stagnant now. It's not growing. It's got the slowest productivity growth in decades. The public debt is higher as a percentage of the economy than it's been since right after World War II, the World War II spending. Income inequality and wealth inequality are at their worst levels since back in the 1920s. These are all serious problems, the things that I talked about in my book, that are going to come to a head, as well as the low interest rate environment in the future, and going to cause serious problems with the economy. We need to unregulate the economy. We need to fix the tax code so it's fairer and distributes income better on an after-tax basis. Second issue, education, clearly. Both, that's going to drive the economy. We can educate our children better. We don't need, if we had a good education system, to import skilled labor. That means educated labor from other countries. That's what the Democrats and Republicans want to do. Keep increasing the HB1 visa program so we can give all the good jobs to people from other countries. Fix our education program, and that will solve the problem. And the third issue is health care. The Affordable Care Act is not working. We need to take a look at health care, introduce choice, competition, and transparency, and we'll be able to have a health care system that really works and is not the most expensive in the world by 2 times.
Mr. Cataldo.
Well, when elected to Congress, there's a few people that are going to make some appearances. You know, one of them are going to, one of the first problems we have here is the heroin opioid epidemic. Greatest public health crisis we've ever seen. We've got 4 people a day dying. This is just completely unacceptable. Massachusetts is the 5th most profitable in doctor kickbacks. And what it comes down to here is that when you go to the doctor's office, you're not necessarily being prescribed something because it's what you need. But this doctor knows in the back of their mind that based on what they have, for tools in their toolbox, they're getting a certain percentage back. That has to stop immediately. Doctors should be trying to help their patients, not make money. Pharmaceutical companies. One of the first things we need to do, the FDA approval process costs $5 billion on average, which is why the cost of medication is being driven up. It's our own government. The regulatory costs are Democrats and our Republicans. We need to make sure that we understand the problem with this epidemic, that heroin and Oxycontin, for instance, are almost identical. That when the FDA clinical trials were done, they were fudged. And you look at placebos being introduced in half of them, and you get 22 veterans a day committing suicide. They should be able to go to any private medical facility in this country. And you look at college education, 430% cost increase over the last 20 years. I would go to each and every college university president and I would say, how much does it actually cost to operate your facility? I want to see the financials. I think we all deserve to see them, especially if our government's going to be providing an inelastic demand, a blank check for college education. That's why it's going up in cost, because it can, not because it has to. Thank you.
Dr. Allegra.
Well, I'm going to start off hearkening back actually to immigration, illegal immigration, because it's also one of the 3 biggest threats, I think, to this nation, our national sovereignty. But really, it's about the lawlessness. So one of the biggest problems we face is the lawlessness in Washington, D.C. When you have a Department of Justice colluding with the White House and a former Secretary of State to cover up her lawless activity that damages our national security, it's a sincere national security threat to this nation. And likewise, we do not have a broken immigration system. What we have is lawlessness in dealing with immigration. So the other 2 issues that are intimately tied in with this are, of course, the economy and our national defense as it relates to overseas, to foreign affairs. The economy is the engine that allows us to have the science and technology to develop our national defense, to put troops in the field and keep them supported, and also, as others at the table have mentioned, to ensure that we have a solid educational system and a strong workforce. So defense, as it relates to foreign affairs, because Russia and China are still our biggest national threats. National sovereignty, we are allowed to have a culture and a border in the United States of America, and the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. We'll begin this next question, and I'm combining 2 questions. It's related to the gridlock and dysfunction in Congress. There were a couple statements made, and really the question is, what could we expect to be different if we choose you to represent us?
Thank you. First of all, I would go to Washington, D.C. as your congressman. I would not caucus with the Democrats or the Republicans. There have practically been no independents in Washington for a long time, but usually when there is one, they caucus with one party or the other. I would seek to compromise, get the 2 parties together to solve some of these problems. The 2-party system is broken. There is gridlock and partisanship and divisiveness in the country. And the party organizations, they control everything. Why do you think that Chris and I aren't getting any applause today? Why do you think that Chris and I didn't have all those signs out there? Because the Democrats and the Republicans have their organizations who show up and do these things to keep their people in power. Now, that's okay. That's your civic freedom to do that. And certainly, it works okay. But, the problem is that there's too much partisanship, too many people on one side or the other, and we need to get more independent thinking in Washington and start to break through that gridlock.
Mr. Cataldo.
I'll give you 3 things that I'm going to do right off the bat. I'm going to take not a penny more for a salary than the median income of this district. And I actually want to take the opportunity to ask that every single person sitting at this table do the same. That if the people in this district aren't given a raise, well then neither should Congress. And when you look at why everybody's so out of touch, Democrat, Republican, they're making on average over 333% more than the average American. And look at what they're doing, nothing. And they're trying to do something, and it looks like they're doing something, but it never churns out. So not a penny more than the median income. You folks get a raise, I get a raise. I hope everyone at the table does the same. Term limits. I will be a tireless advocate, not someone that's going to pretend, at first and then change their mind. I'm going to not sleep. Well, I'm going to have to sleep, obviously, but this is how passionately I am about term limits. I really believe they need to happen. We need to clean the house. It is necessary at every level of government. There are very intelligent, talented folks that need to be involved in the leadership of this country in order for it to survive. And, and I would also absolutely make sure that the people of this district are represented. I would want you to know where I am and how much money I'm spending. The same way I want you to look at the House Ethics and the Federal Election Commission reports before you look at my website, so that you see that what you're reading is the truth. And that truth will always, always be my #1 priority, the transparency. I want you to know where your congressman is at all times. You deserve to know. Thank you.
Dr. Allegra.
Yeah, people are under the mistaken impression that it's Congress's job to go to Washington, D.C. and churn out as many laws as they possibly can. I want you to understand that every law that's passed represents that much of a reduction in your freedoms. Now, a couple of years ago, I looked into this. I did a Google search to find out how many federal laws that we have in this country. It led me to the second listing, which was from the Library of Congress, and it was a seminar, and the answer was there are more federal laws in this country than are knowable. So when somebody tells me that we have a do-nothing Congress that generates only 60 or 70 laws in a year that's actually signed by the president, I'm saying the federal government is finally working as it should. Now, listen, the way to deal with gridlock in any organization, including the federal government, is this. You're always going to run into people who have different positions, some of them based on closely held principles. So you don't go at it warlike. The very first thing you do is you sit down in a room and you say, what is it we agree on? Let's get that done. Then let's go to the next tier, and if we have to do a little bit of compromising on that, we do. Let's fight over the rest, but let's get the people's business done first. The other thing is term limits are necessary because people have just become too entrenched in Washington, D.C. Jefferson, Adams, those guys didn't go there for 40 years. They went and did the people's business. They got their fannies back on their horses and went back to their plows and their pens. I'll be in Congress for 3 terms, 6 years, no more.
Representative Peter.
Thank you. I want to go back quickly to my opening statement. And the gentleman who was there risking his life, the better son. I'm guided not by parties. I'm guided by values. And that's the way I make my decisions. It's the way I always have. When I was in state government, and things were working poorly in the Senate, to put it mildly, and they needed change, I stood up to our own party, our own Senate President, President Bulger at the time, and fought for those changes, which came later, I think, in large measure for standing up to him. When the Boston Marathon bombing occurred, and I spent a year investigating it hand in hand with the chairman of Homeland Security, Mike McCall from Texas. My own party at the end tried to influence me to not go public with it, not have the information become public because it might embarrass the Democratic administration at the time. But I stood up alone, the only Democrat in the House to do that. So I work together, also in a bipartisan manner, whether it's working on issues of national security, whether it's working together on fishing industry issues, whether it's working on the opioid issues together. I have Republicans working hand in hand with me. We do work together, some of us, but you have to have the will to do it, and you have to be governed not by party, but by values.
The next question will be This is related to the Affordable Care Act. The individual talks about the small business and the cost for health insurance for employees, and even sharing the cost, how very, very expensive it is right now. So how would you strengthen the Affordable Care Act and manage the costs, or would you repeal it and start over?
I'll tell you, I think at this point it has to be repealed. I think it's just completely done an injustice to all the people in this country. It's led to more people being insured, but they're paying more for less, and we're actually looking at a rise in cost. And really, it's the same thing like car insurance in this state. It's illegal not to have it. And when you look at how that Affordable Care Act was created, well, it's just like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, pretty much in secret by corporate lobbyists. And that's why We're all being told different things by the Democrats and Republicans and being distracted by kittens in the trees. And, meanwhile, every time we go to the doctors, we pay more and get less, and that's a problem. And so if it involves scrapping the Affordable Care Act, I think it does. I really do. I think that, we need to look at the fact that our small businesses, they're having trouble keeping their doors open, never mind opening them. And this is a country where that opportunity should be just a given, and it's not. There's an attack right now taking place on the American quality of life, and that is happening through the incredible cost increases. We're looking at 22% on average increase in cost. And so I'll tell you something, this isn't about legacies, it isn't about appeasing parties, it's about making sure that you seniors out there on fixed incomes aren't able to be in a position where you have to decide life or death based on your income. I mean, this is incredible. The fact that this is even happening is just absolutely absurd. And so that is why I think the Affordable Care Act needs to be appealed. The insurance companies have gotten enough. They make enough money. It's time for us to be able to live. Thank you.
Dr. Allegra.
Repeal. And you notice I didn't say repeal and replace. I said repeal. Look, there were two key issues with health care in this country before the Affordable Care Act went into effect, if it is actually in effect. And that is accessibility for a segment of the population and skyrocketing costs. Now, neither of those two problems have been alleviated. Marginally, more people are insured, but a lot of people have lost their insurance and been forced to go on to other plans as well. Look, I view it as, with this analogy, if your carburetor goes dead, you don't ditch your car and buy a new one. You fix the broken part of the car. And in this case, one of the things that we can do for accessibility is to take advantage of walk-in clinics, which are arising in this country, all over this continent, by market forces, for instance, at Walgreens and at Walmart. That alleviates some of the problem. Part of the other problem is that we have a lot of empty beds in our urban areas. It's wasted space and wasted money in hospitals that could be used to divert people from emergency rooms, which is expensive and less effective. The other big problem is affordability and the skyrocketing costs. If the government gets involved, the price is going to go up. That's a proven maxim. So we need to get the government out of our health care. Obamacare is going down on its own. Let's just hope that we're not forced into a single-payer national system, which will be far worse, with longer waits, fewer doctors, and poorer care.
Representative
Thank you. A couple of weeks ago, in my office, a couple of young people came in to talk to me about healthcare issues and to share their stories. One of them, Dana, had a husband, had a very rare form of cancer, and bills and the cost for treating that ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. She had private insurance from her employer, but she was able to change, because of affordability, into the Affordable Care Act, and was able to afford to pay those bills. And she and her husband had several years that they were able to live together before he passed away. Another young man, Cody, who was a college student, and he had a form of cancer as well. And he was telling me how grateful he was that he could go under his parents' health care plan because of the Affordable Care Act, because he still hadn't reached the age of 26. This is about people. It's not about statistics, but you have to look at the statistics too. The growth of healthcare costs has never grown more slowly than in the last year. You have to go back 50 years since they've been dealing with it. And here on the Cape, which is important, if you're looking at the effect of the Affordable Care Act, look at our community health centers right here. The Outer Cape, Community Health Center, Cape Cod, Duffy, Island Care. If we did not have the Affordable Care Act, they wouldn't be funded the way they are now, and they wouldn't be here to serve people in an affordable manner.
Mr. Harrington,
It may have been the slowest rate in a while, but we still had a 5.2% increase in healthcare costs last year. It's scheduled to be 6% per year going forward, and that's probably very conservative. We're spending $3.3 trillion a year on healthcare in this country. That's a huge part of the economy. It's money that could be spent on other things to drive the economy. Our healthcare system is twice as expensive as the average developed country on a per-person basis. Yet, believe it or not, the results that we show in this country for healthcare in terms of The quality of healthcare is not at the top of the pack. It's in the middle in terms of all of the other developed countries. So we need to fix it. The Affordable Care Act is not a good law. In my opinion, it just entrenched the existing bad system with all the layers of bureaucracy and administrative costs that are in the system. And it does need to be repealed, but we need a comprehensive approach to healthcare that introduces more, again, competition and choice and transparency. When was the last time you asked your doctor or your hospital, what is this going to cost? And got a blank stare. They don't even know what it's going to cost sometimes. And because they figure it's all insured and someone will pay for it. So I believe in universal health, quality health care for everybody in America, but it's how we do that and how we pay for it and how do we make our healthcare system overall less expensive and get better quality for the money we spend.
The next question, and we'll begin with Dr. Allegro, and I'm combining a number of questions related to gun violence. What your position would be on background checks, prevention, and public safety, and being able to make sure the public is safe from guns.
Sure. First, I have to challenge the assertion that healthcare costs are growing at a slow rate, because they were, as many of you know, many of the provisions that are going to drive up the prices rapidly were cynically held off until after this election cycle. So look out in 2017. Now, on gun violence, once again, I'm data-driven, and I look at the statistics and I look at the facts. Recently Maura Healey put on a huge gun grab in the state, which Mr. Keating supported with a letter to the Boston Globe. But here are the facts. Long guns, rifles, the ones that they're seeking to ban, have been used in murders in this country far fewer times than hammers and clubs. There's about 300 on average over the course of any given year. That's number one. Number two, the facts and the data show that taking the guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens does not affect the crime rate, the gun crime rate or the violent crime rate. And if you need any proof of that, there's not enough time here to go through all the numbers. Just look at the cities where Chicago, for instance, with over 3,000, I might be mistaken on this number, something like 3,000 shootings this year alone. Chicago and cities like Washington, D.C. have the strictest gun laws in the country. And please just take note that all of these mass shootings that have been done in where? Gun-free zones. So there's no correlation between taking the guns out of law-abiding citizens' hands and any increase or any impact on violent crime or gun crime.
I was a DA before I was a member of Congress. I used to sit down with victims' families, victims of violence and victims of gun violence, and talk to those families. And I would say, is there something I could do other than the prosecution? Is there something we could do to help you? Almost to a person, they told me, yes. Don't let what happened to me and my family happen to other families. And that's what guides me in just some common sense of dealing with Congress now that we can't pass in the Congress a bill that says suspected terrorists can't legally obtain guns and explosives. We can't close some of the loopholes in background checks. I sat down with a woman just recently as well, and she had a mentally ill son that had some severe challenges. He wasn't supposed to get a gun under the law. However, he went on the internet and got a gun, and unfortunately took his own life, which is what they were doing. Look, you can deal with statistics all you want. Just say that to the families at Sandy Hook, or San Bernardino, or Aurora, or in Orlando. The kind of weapons we have now make one individual, whether they be a terrorist or someone deranged, a one-person army. So there's things we can do to make things safer, but we have to have a Congress that at least allow a bill on the floor for a vote for democracy to happen.
Mr. Harrington.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear which name you said. Let me start by quoting the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now that's as clear as day, right? It is totally vague. And I've studied the Constitution, I've studied and read the Madison's notes and every word that was said at the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, and clearly there was no intent on the part of the framers to forever ban any kind of regulation of guns. Guns don't kill people, Mark. They're not a problem in this country. Please. I have to agree with Bill on this. I support strong gun control. I think we need background checks. We need everyone who buys and sells a gun to be licensed. I would support a ban on assault weapons. How you define that, obviously, there's some detail there to look into. But I would certainly defend people's right to defend themselves, to have a handgun, to have guns that may be used for hunting and sport. But basically, I would support much stronger gun control than we have today, which, again, there's no bipartisan support for that in Congress. Even many of the Democrats are controlled by the NRA. So this is a problem that needs to be resolved, and it's not going to be resolved within the current political system.
Question for the moderator.
People are in many ways a product of their environments. We've got an intrinsic violence problem in this country. There is just no doubt about that. And this is a new development. I don't know if it's the video games, the movies, whatever, however, but we know that violence is almost normal at this point. And that's disturbing in itself. When I was 12 years old, my father took me to the range. He's a lifetime member of the Braintree Gun Club, and so I grew up handling weapons safely from a very young age, and he would only take me in the middle of the night because he was so afraid that if there was anybody else in the range that somebody, misfire. They're very dangerous, these weapons. They need to be handled properly. That's why they need to be locked up. That's why they need to be unloaded. They need to be kept in certain places at certain times for certain reasons. This isn't a joke here. But here's the thing, people kill people, not guns. Guns can save people, in fact, they do. Look at what happened in Taunton when that New Bedford teacher was stabbed. I mean, there hadn't been somebody sitting there having a pizza with their wife that was carrying a sidearm, that, the death count would have no doubt been higher. And I'll tell you something right now. Every single time I put my Smith & Wesson in a holster, I hope to God that I never have to draw that weapon. But I'll tell you something, knowing late at night when there's nobody around, when you might not be able to get to the phone to call the police, if somebody comes through your house, through your door, knowing that you can defend yourself and defend your family is critical. It's American. And, you look at the assault weapons ban, I'll tell you, after the federal assault weapons ban expired in the 90s, Massachusetts mimicked it, and it's still on the books today. And what Maura Healey did was make 400,000 law-abiding citizens criminals, and that's wrong fundamentally as well. They're going to get them either way.
Ms. Moderator, question to the moderator.
Yes.
This is a really touchy subject. I would request that we each get one more minute, one round to address this. May we?
The thing is, I have about 8 other
Okay,
questions.
thank you. Just asking
Just trying to
folks.
get through as many, and I think this is going to be the last question, and this is related to the national debt. What I would suggest for all the candidates is all the questions that I haven't asked, I will ask between the League and the Cape Cod Times to get all these questions to you, so that in the next several weeks you can continue to talk about these issues that have been raised.
Thank you.
The final question to the candidates, and we'll begin with Representative Keating, is related to the national debt. Where would you begin to reduce the national debt?
Well, we're already through sequester, which isn't the best way to reduce something because it's automatic across the board type of cut. We're already doing that. The deficit is going in the other direction, but our debt obviously is one of the major issues that we have to deal with as a country. And again, we get back to having a strong economy because we have to make cuts, and we are. We're making cuts, and people feel it. Our office hears about it when these cuts are made. But we also have to increase revenues, and the best way to do that is through economic development again. And one of the important things that's going to allow us to have a more competitive environment is things like the Affordable Care Act, health care costs. We could clearly do better driving down those costs with prescription drug costs, which are skyrocketing too quickly. But we have to make investments. We haven't talked today about the infrastructure. 60% of the bridges in my district are failing. Around the country, we're becoming a third-class country in the world. And that's just not an opinion, that's what the civil engineers said. We have to invest as well. So if we do the cuts that we are doing and do more, and we invest in education so that we're driving that workforce We can lower the corporate tax rate. I'm in favor of that in terms of making us more competitive. But we have to move forward economically and have a middle class. Our economy and our debt won't change unless we have a strong middle class that can have opportunities for jobs and the opportunity to bring welfare to their families.
Mr. Harrington, same question.
Yes, Congressman Keating says that the deficit is going down. Well, it was, but if you looked at the numbers that came out 2 days ago, the deficit for the past year, the federal deficit was close to $600 billion. That's up 35% from the year before, and it's going to continue to rise again. It came down because of fiscal stimulus, and it came down because of monetary policy, which can no longer be used to help out. We've got a huge problem with the debt and the deficit. The debt now is $14.1 trillion. That's the public debt, not the money the government owes to itself. And that is the highest percentage of the economy since right after World War II. We also have trillions of dollars in unfunded pension funds, unfunded public pensions, which are being used a discount rate of 7.5%, which means they're far more unfunded than that, because that can't be earned in the marketplace. So the debt is a huge problem. How do we solve it? Healthcare is a big part of it. Government pays $1.3 million between Medicare and Medicaid alone, and there are other programs that cost the government. We need to look at Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and how to reform those programs. We need to look at the tax code. Yes, I would support higher taxes on the very highest incomes, but we need to do that in a fair way that helps drive the economy and reduce the federal debt.
Mr. Cataldo.
21 trillion, roughly, if we look at this pragmatically. It's really about 400 if you look at the unfunded pensions and insurance liabilities and all this other stuff that the two parties have been using as collateral to borrow more money. Which gets to my point. When you borrow money, when you're in debt, banks make money. And the banks make that money and they use it to lobby Congress by infiltrating the two-party system. And it's almost too easy, and it's happening in plain sight. People don't understand that out of that 21 trillion in debt, the government's taking in 4.7 trillion every fiscal year in income. That's our tax money being levied, all collectively coming together, 4.7 trillion. Now, there are things we can do with that money, and we need to do things with it other than pay debt. I mean, we need to get out of this whole needing to be in debt to operate, and that's why the Trans-Pacific Partnership is such a dangerous thing. I'm so absolutely against it, and the TTIP as well. And the whole idea of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and the World Trade Organizations, right in their first paragraph, they say that any policy passed, it has to be economically beneficial to the developed country over the developing country. I mean, 10 trillion of the 21 trillion is straight trade deficit, and it's just simply being financed by private entities and corporations. And that's a problem in itself. Trade should be fair and balanced. If we, after this is over, wanted to trade something, you should get something as equal as I'm giving you. The banks, the lawyers, the politicians, the lobbyists, consultants, everybody's so out of control stealing a piece of our pie that we work hard for every day. And manufacturing, anybody that's ever been laid off in this room, you didn't get laid off because you didn't have the skills. You got laid off because your company sold you out because your politicians and the two-party system did as well. And that's why you need somebody in Congress that's not going to be bound by that chain. Sorry.
Thank you. Dr. Allegra.
Yeah, quick correction on gun control. You can't get on the internet and have a gun delivered to your home. It's delivered to a licensed dealer where the proper checks and balances are put into place. And I have an answer to what I would say to a family who came into my office asking for protection for their children. I would say I wouldn't bash the police who on the streets protect you against violence. Let me address the question that was just asked, because I heard commentary on how to reduce the debt, but I didn't hear an answer to the question from anyone. The way that you reduce the debt, not just talk about the national debt, but the annual deficit, but the debt is to grow the economy. Yes, we can employ some savings by reducing spending, but really the biggest impact will be made by growing the economy. That requires jobs. If you know anything about business and jobs at all, you understand that 2/3 of the jobs in this country come from small businesses. And if you want the businesses to thrive and hire people, the best thing you can do is to get the foot of the federal government off the throat of our small business.
statements. And again, this was a random drawing, the order for closing statements, and we'll begin. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes with Mr. Harrington.
First of all, I want to start with another quote. There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution, John Adams. That's what we have today. Two political parties opposed to each other on every single issue and getting nothing done in Washington. That's why I'm running for Congress. I support strong campaign finance reform. We should drop the limit on federal contributions from $2,700 to $1,000. We should prohibit contributions from political action committees. Would hurt Bill a lot. And we should limit contributions from other interested parties like lobbyists. We should also look at election reform. We should replace the taxpayer-funded private primaries with preliminary elections that are nonpartisan. Term limits, I agree. No more than 12 years in a position. There are many other things we can do to open up the political system and create a better, stronger, more qualified government to solve some of the serious problems that we have, that we're going to have to face. I'm the only candidate here at this table today who has extensive business management experience. I'm the only candidate here today who has really studied the issues and written a book about them. Not in terms of what a political party wants to do, but in terms of what we really need to do to help this country grow stronger and to be better in the future and to avoid a potential economic and fiscal disaster that is coming. So please consider, other than the activists who keep applauding, the rest of you, the sensible middle majority, please consider voting for an independent this time. Thank you.
Representative Keenan.
Nancy, thank you again. And we did get to two questions that I hear going around the Cape more than any two. And I hope that they're in the mix and we can answer them at least by letter. And that's the issues of homelessness and the opioid epidemic that we have here, a terrible disease. But I want to just close by sharing a story that made me feel actually proud of what I'm trying to do in Congress. One of the senior Republicans, after the early part of this Congress, grabbed me on the floor and said, "I got to tell you this story." We had our orientation for the new Republican members, and one of the new Republican members put up their hand and said, "Is there anyone on the other side you can work with?" And this guy told me that, you know what they said? They said, "Yeah, there's a guy in Massachusetts. You can actually get some things done and work together on issues." That's me. And he had to share that story with me. I'm very proud of that in today's Congress, too. You know, and I have worked together. I've worked together with Republicans on bills that I have to attack terrorist funding. I've worked together on airport security issues. I've worked together on the fishing issues together. I've worked on issues surrounding the opioid epidemic on many different fronts of legislation, working hand in hand with Republicans, including the Safe Prescribing for Veterans Act that I'm the key sponsor of. And the law that was recently signed in dealing with having federal monies there to help us really get at the source of the opioid problems. You know, you can say what you want about drugs on the street or drugs on the border. The number one cause, and I was a DA and know this, the number one source for our problem is right in our medicine cabinets. That's where the people are starting on these opioid prescription drugs that lead to heroin. And I have a bill that became law to make sure that there's federal monies to help that take-back program at the community level. So I want to thank you again and tell you, if you're looking at this election, look at someone that wants to work with people and bases their efforts on values, not just party.
Mr. Cataldo.
$730 million has been spent so far for people to be in office, to run for office in this election season. You know, I'm going to get the most amount of votes for the least amount of money spent. I really do want to prove that. We're going to prove it. And I really, truly believe that people want evidence when they hear things from politicians nowadays. I learned that myself from standing in front of these grocery stores. That's why I stand for the term limits. That's why I'm not going to take a penny more than the median income of this district as a salary. That's why I'm going to fight tirelessly to advocate for all of you. Because I understand that this South Shore, South Coast, Cape Cod, and Islands, the 46 towns and cities of this district, we're in trouble. This country's in trouble, and we need help. And I'll tell you, we've sent Democrats, we've sent Republicans, we know it doesn't work. In fact, things have gotten worse. And that's why we need to look at our Constitution and see that nowhere in it does it say that a two-party system is necessary. In fact, our founding fathers, they were horrified by the notion. And that's why Ben Franklin, when he walked out of the Constitutional Convention, he said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And I know we can keep it. And I know that we have what it takes to turn things around in this country. And I can tell you right now, I'm going to have a lot of time to do those things because I will not be dialing for dollars 6 to 8 hours a day in a private office. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we all need, because the money isn't going to be dictating solutions that are going to solve the problems we face. And right now, we're on the brink of nuclear war, financial collapse. I mean, $41,000 a second is what that quantitative easing by the Fed costs. That's our money. That's our children's money. At this point, the future of our country is quite literally at stake. And that's why we need to just take a look at this for what it is, which is just pay to play. People just throwing money around, protecting their interests so that the interests of all of us aren't. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here to make any money. I don't have any. I've got the student loan debt. Look at the net worth. You'll stop laughing and you'll realize, oh my God, that's exactly what we need in Congress. And I hope that I inspire other candidates as well. And I hope that we continue to rewrite the playbook and save this country. Thank you.
Spinning narratives is fun, but it doesn't make policy. For instance, I can tell the narrative about the elderly couple, 70 years old, who had to lose their health insurance because it didn't have pediatric dental care. So, look, baseball players love to tell you about the home runs they hit and mention nothing about the strikeouts. Look, many of you in this room, like me, are in the neighborhood of 60 years old. I'm going to say something that's going to sting some of the people in here, but it's a fact nevertheless. The U.S. Congress has been controlled by the incumbent's party over 70% of our lifetimes. Over 70%. In that time, public opinion in Congress has plummeted to 80% disapproval, and 2/3 of Americans don't think, no, we're on the wrong track. Now, I'll be the first to point out, both chambers of Congress are currently in Republican hands. You see, I and many Republicans are disgusted with our current Republican Congress as well. So it's not simply a Democrat or Republican thing. Rather, it's a bill of goods being sold to us. The misguided notion that everyone can have everything for free. A socialist utopia. And what has that meant for Americans so far? Open borders so that opiates like heroin and cocaine surge into our neighborhoods and into our children's veins. Equal but poor outcome for all. A disappearing middle class. Obamacare with fewer doctors. Longer waiting periods and skyrocketing costs. Poor economic growth. Soaring violence in our cities. I'm only listing circumstances you already know about. Look, this unrealistic utopian vision of our incumbent president, it's supported by our incumbent congressman. There's just no running from the truth. He's voted to support the president's agenda 90% of the time. So please ask yourselves just one more question today. Should we stay on this track, or is it time for change? For a representative with a different background, fresh perspective, a deep knowledge of science, so important in today's world, and with an open mind? Ask yourself that question between now and November 8th, and be assured that if you vote for Allegro on November 8th, you'll be sending your own voice to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. But I have 3 announcements that I would like to make before we officially close. On October 21st, the League of Women Voters will be holding a debate for the candidates running for the Barnstable County Commissioner. It's at 10 o'clock at the Cape Cod Community Media Center in Dennisport. There are 2 things related to the election this year and registration and voting. First of all, the last day to register to vote is next Wednesday, October 19th. If you haven't registered, there are enrollment forms here. You can also do that on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website. And make a note that if you have moved, it may be necessary for you to resubmit a new enrollment with your new address. The other thing that is new in Massachusetts this year is early voting. So beginning with this election, Mass voters will be able to go and cast their ballot before the actual election day. So this year, early voting period will begin on Monday, October 24th, and end on Friday, November 4th. So each town has established their voting sessions during normal business hours usually, and some are offering evening and Saturday options. So there are some particular websites. You can either go to your town clerk's website or call your town clerk's office or go to massearlyvote.com to find out how you can do that. So the League has long had a saying that democracy is not a spectator sport. We thank especially the audience for their great questions for today in participating that way. And we thank the Cape Cod Community College for the use of this site, the Cape Cod Times for their co-sponsorship, and Cape Cod Media Center for being able to broadcast this event. But we most especially thank the candidates, not only for your participation today, but for your willingness to serve the constituents of the 9th District. So let's say thank you.